Whereas for many years we've been able to link people to crimes by fingerprints and DNA, this is the first time ever we did it systematically by images. The way she describes it is she's looking at a crowd of people, she sees the person, and it's like they're in colour and the rest are in black and white. It's a God-given talent. We established that out of sort of a 50,000 workforce in the Met, we found about 150 super recognisers. Time at the moment is shoplifting, for example. Once somebody's run off, the only thing left is an image. The friction between the police CCTV control room, the police going there, we must have it, and we must have it now. And then two weeks later, they've still not collected it. The police could solve so much more crime if they were far more organised with images.
Welcome to the Pocket Sergeant podcast. Before I introduce our next guest, I would just ask you to give the podcast a rating, leave a review, and subscribe on YouTube. Give our videos a like. Each time you do that, it enables more people to see and hear the podcast. Today's guest is a true pioneer in forensic investigation, a man who turned an extraordinary human ability into a vital policing tool. Mike Neville is a former Detective Chief Inspector at New Scotland Yard. He created the world's first super recogniser unit, a team of officers with the uncanny ability to remember faces even under the worst conditions. That team has uncovered rioters from the 2011 London riots, identified the Novichok poisoning suspects, and solved countless cold cases with just hours of CCTV and one flash of a face. He now heads Super Recognisers International, sharing his expertise globally and working with academic partners and private sectors to build the future of human-based facial recognition. Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Yes, thanks, Paul. It's a pleasure to be here.
Mike, can you walk us through your early career from the Royal Military Police to joining the Met at New Scotland Yard?
Yeah, so I joined the military police in '83. I was out in Hong Kong and Germany and Northern Ireland. We had spotters on the checkpoints. I was quite good at faces. Then I decided I'd join the police. I thought that was my intention. And Greater Manchester weren't recruiting. Obviously, my Bolton accent sort of gives my region away. And I went in the phone box in Londonderry and they weren't recruiting. So my friend said, I'm joining the Met. So I literally ended up in the Met as a result of that moment. In the Met, I was in the Clapham police station. And I realised there was a change in robberies. The robberies went from being sort of middle-aged men like me with a stocking mask that you see on the Sweeney to young black guys who were simply steaming the premises. They weren't using any weapons. And so the flying squad at that time weren't collating that because of the lack of guns or whatever. And I soon picked up on the fact there'd been 70 or more of these robberies on banks, post offices and building societies. And I ran the local army cadet, so people trusted me and they started giving me names. And it was really when CCTV started. And what I rapidly realised is there was no systems around the images. If you leave a fingerprint or a DNA sample at the scene of a crime, there's a sort of national database, there's a procedure around how forces use that and how the Home Office judges it. With CCTV, there was none of those systems. So as I got promoted, I set up a unit originally at Southwark Police Station and then moving on to the yard, which collated all the images. All the images came to one place and we started to identify them. But what was readily apparent is I circulated 100 images, I'd probably get 50 or 60 identified, but there weren't random officers. Certain officers would make 5 or 10 identifications. So the question is, why are they doing this? Are they just good street cops or is there more to this? And then I met
so just taking it back to your Royal Military Policing experience, you were a spotter in there?
Yeah, so we did the checkpoints in Northern Ireland, with the IRA terrorists coming through. The best one I ever spotted was Martin McGuinness, who was one of the leaders of Sinn Féin.
Okay, so when did you realise that you had an ability to recognise faces?
Well, I'm okay. I'm good. I'm not bad at it, but the people I deal with are beyond belief, So,
what really, so you wouldn't consider yourself as a super recogniser?
I may not be. I was considered me the boss of it, really. But what I was saying, as I said earlier, it was the fact I met Professor Davis, Josh Davis, and he was sceptical. His PhD was on how bad people are at making IDs. And we know, how many bad cases there are where people have been falsely recognised. And so I said to him, and we started doing some tests, and he said, I think we're onto something here. And then we worked out it was a professor, Richard Russell, over in the States at Harvard, who'd coined this phrase super recognizers. Because he was looking at people quite the opposite, who were called prosopagnosics, who are face blind. This term was used, and then we started to find more. And you alluded to the 2011 riots. Well, I exposed in the police the lack of use of CCTV. And it made the international press. And of course, people in the police will know that, senior officers have got two choices when failings are exposed. You can either deal with the failings and sort them out, or you can shoot the messenger and get rid of them. Well, the senior officers initially tried the first one. They wanted to shut me up and silence me. And then the riots came, and I was taken into a room by a commander who was told, well, okay, we accept that what you're saying was right now. And I've been arguing for a database to be put on, and this was the commissioner then, Hogan Howe, ordered it to be put on in one day, despite that after 2 years of fighting with those ridiculous clones in the IT department. So that really forced it on. So with the riots, after the riots, we did more testing, and we established that out of sort of a 50,000 workforce in the Met, we found about 150 super recognizers. So that's where we really pushed it forward. And these are people who just don't forget faces.
How many faces are we talking?
They can remember hundreds, if not thousands of them. It said they'd never forget a face. And they can memorize a face. Somebody can show them a face. One of the civilian super recognizers I work with, the way she describes it is she's looking at a crowd of people. She sees the person she's, wanting to find. And it's like they're in colour and the rest are in black and white. And what people will say is a lot of forces are concentrating on automated facial recognition to the point of obsession, to be honest. And it isn't a competition. Firstly, with automated facial recognition, the law says you've got to have it verified by a human, so the super recognizers can be combined together with it. And also with retrospective stuff, some forces, I've done some research, and it's only about 20% of images, if that, captured by CCTV are suitable for automated facial recognition, because the rest are blurry, they're angled, they're dark night. But a human can recognize those things. So there's a place for both things, and both things working together can make a big difference.
So the super recognizers can still recognize people from grainy footage?
Absolutely. The listeners and viewers will, recall that they can recognise one of their relatives by the back of their head walking down the street. The human mind takes into all sorts of things. So I show, on an exercise, I show people, like, here's an image of a guy, he was a soldier 40 years ago, and they're looking for him now. One of the super recognisers, it was a Thames Valley police officer, said to me, look, I saw his face and I thought that was him, but it was the way he walked. He's ex-guardsman. So the human mind, a computer just measures things. The human mind takes into account all different aspects. So that's why it's so important. And of course, a white person, a black person, and a Chinese person may all have the same facial measurements ultimately to the machine, but a human being can say, hold on, we're looking for a white guy. This guy is a Chinese guy, so he's not the right person. So there's a place for everybody.
So you'd said there was around 100 to 150 cops that were super recognizers that you'd identified from regularly.
50,000.
Oh, all right. Okay. So what would be the process then? So you've found these super recognizers, and through repeatedly identifying suspects, then what did you do with those cops that you've then identified of having this ability?
Well, just to go back, Paul, so how we identified them was initially it was by results. I had all the results. So I could say a guy, for example, a guy Idris Barda, who's a jailer at Westminster. I knew by his results he was very, very good. And there's a whole load of those sort of people, 20, 30. What we did then, we did some testing. We myself and Professor Davis got some EU funding, and we organised some tests. So we had a 3-phase test where we would... Firstly, we'd do a 10-minute test, which weeds most people out. Then people get a 2-hour online test and 15 minutes. And
Sorry, when we're saying test, is it a case of showing these people a bunch of images and then see if they can identify them again?
So if your viewers and listeners Google Greenwich University Super Recognizer test, it's a 10-minute go. They can have a look at that. If they pass that, there's 14 faces. If you get 10 or 11 or more, then you've possibly got the skill, and they can contact me and I can arrange more testing. And then the third phase is face to face. And to answer your second question, how were they used? So out of the 150, about 6, 7 or 8 of them were constantly deployed at the yard. Their role was initially to go to major operations where people needed spotting, at Notting Hill, thieving at the O2, football match, whatever. But there's a lot of downtime. So what the main role became, what was originally the downtime role, they went through, I had a database of all images of criminals who've been captured on CCTV, and we did this thing called face snapping, where they match people to different crimes. So the first one was, for example, was a guy called Polo Ronchi. We knew he was a burglar. He was white. He wore a hat. So we searched for every image we had of a white burglar in a hat, and he was found 14 times. And the best one we had, a guy called Austin Caballero, was a very active, high-value thief. We got him 43 times. So whereas for many years we've been able to link people to crimes by fingerprints and DNA, this is the first time ever we did it systematically by images. And of course, there's a massive. What one of the commanders in the Met said to me is almost like, oh, you're going to create loads of work. But we reduce work because if you arrest somebody for one CCTV image and you say that is you, they'll say, no, it's not me at all.
Yeah.
If you get 10 of them and lay them out on the table, firstly, I know you've got 50-50 chance of finding the clothing shown. But if you lay 10 images down, this is when the solicitor says, I think I need to speak to my client. We found over 90% pleaded guilty. And of course, there's benefits to this. Firstly, the victim doesn't have to go through the awfulness of a rape or armed robbery or some violent crime and get in court. There's massive police savings, massive court savings. And the person gets dealt with properly, because they can't go to court with one image. With one image, you can say, "Oh, I'm very sorry, I did this wicked crime. It was all a big mistake." If you go in with 10 or 20 burglaries, robberies, thefts, or whatever, you get put down because they can say, "This is not an error. This is a lifestyle choice," and so it makes a big difference. And I would commend this to police forces, because the lack of use of images is scandalous. The lowest. Between 5 and 10% most forces are identifying of images submitted. So there's massive opportunities to increase detections and target prolific offenders. And you think the thing of the day at the moment, the crime at the moment is shoplifting, for example. Once somebody's run off, the only thing left is an image, and most shops have CCTV. And so massive opportunities are being missed to link prolific offenders and make communities safer.
But of course, implementing something like this could well reduce an officer's workload as well. Because you'll know as well as I do, there's police officers out there sometimes with 10, 15, 20 crimes on their queue because of outstanding suspects.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they're waiting for the circuit. Yeah.
So what you're dealing with, and you'll be getting rid of those prolific criminals who cause all the aggravation, those who are constantly thieving, burgling, and robbing, and officers as well. They appreciate being used. So the super recognisers would say to me, before you came into existence, I'd make identifications. You'll tell an officer, "Oh, I think that's Billy Smith," and they just could ignore you. If it came through me as the DCI, I then told the DCI on the area, and we judged it. We had performance indicators, and you know as well as I do, in the police, what gets measured gets done. And at the moment, the use of fingerprints and DNA is measured at every level. It's measured by the Home Office against similar forces. It's measured internally. The use of images isn't measured. The best thing the government could do is start measuring it, because then chief constables would take note. But I can only assure people, at a time, 2/3 of police forces are either inadequate or require improvement when they're inspected by the Peel inspectors for investigating crime. The detection rates are like 5% for crime. This is a way of getting it up to nearly 10% at very little cost. And very little effort, because the images exist, the super recognisers in the forces exist, and we're not just talking police officers, all sorts of police staff as well. And the systems to monitor things exist already in fingerprints and DNA, so it's a case of just having 3 things measuring in one way rather than just 2 things. So I've had the pleasure this week of working with Hertfordshire Police, the Chief Constable there. It's a breath of fresh air, really. I contacted him on New Year's Day when he took post. I said, I can help you out. And Andy Profit came back to me straight away and said, how can you do this? And so it's culminated in doing a lot of research there, working with his officers, and they now have 12 trained super recognisers. So we finished the course yesterday.
Is this through the similar process as you went through before? So identifying those cops that are regularly identifying suspects and narrowing them down that way?
We literally put out an email. A detective superintendent put out an email to the entire force saying, "Have a go at this test. Report back to me if you score over 10." And then we did that. Then we did the second lot of testing. Then we did the next, and then we put together the course. And of course, it takes about a couple of months to do every stage because people are off on holiday and whatever. And then what we're introducing as well is a systematic showing of images. So, for example, at the moment, most police officers will experience, you come on for a briefing, do you know this bloke? And there's a picture on the slide. And after a couple of days, it falls away. So what if the best super recognisers on holiday, or off sick or whatever? So we have a systematic approach and I had this in the Met where officers who are restricted duties through very good reason, heart conditions, cancer, this sort of stuff. One guy had one hand, lost in a traffic accident. I gave them a meaningful role. They would visit every super recogniser and say, look, I last saw you on this day. I'm going to show you all the images from since then. And we trained them how to do the Code D Part B statements in absolute perfectness, really, how to describe what they're saying. And the result of that system alone doubled the identifications. I mean, to give you an idea of numbers, really, that in the Met, I would receive 500-600 images a week of people committing crime. The vast majority of them, volume crime, theft, burglary, whatever. Very few murders and armed robberies, because, of course, there's a lot less, thankfully, murders and armed robberies than there are thefts. About 50 to 60% of those would be identified, and about 75% would be converted into offenders brought to justice. What you've got on police forces now, and these are different police forces I've been to, they're identifying about 7%. So to give you some numbers, my stats show about 2% of crimes generate a CCTV image. Okay, there are some crimes I'm not going to have CCTV images if they're like possession of drugs or knives or whatever.
Yeah.
But how can burglary? 40% of households have Ring doorbells. Nearly every shop has CCTV, but only 2%. So you've got to go to 10,000 crimes. If you look at 10,000 reported crimes, that will result in 200 sort of sets of images which relate to those 10,000 crimes. But if you've got an ID rate of 7%, that means that those 200 crimes, 14 have now got an identified suspect from CCTV. If you then say 40% of those are lucky to get converted into offender brought to justice, it's 5 crimes. So 5 crimes out of 10,000 are solved by images. That is just scandalous in a country awash with CCTV. So you only have to increase it. So let's say, for example, you can, and I've done this, you get it up to 10%. So out of 10,000 crimes, you've got 1,000 images relating to crimes. Yeah? You then can have a 60% ID rate because you're being systematic about it. You're using super recognisers, facial recognition, logo recognition, whatever. You get now that's 600. 40% get converted. That's 450. So instead of having 4 detections, you've got 450. Now, it's that. I saw myself as a sort of Henry Ford of this, an industrial process, really. At the moment, it's a cottage industry. It's left to chance. Officer finds an image of a suspect, circulates where he thinks it's fit. Have a look at this. Do anybody know who it is? No.
File it undetected.
Well, the deputy chief, Graham Gerrard, was the head of CCTV many years ago. He was a deputy chief in Cheshire, and he found a case where an officer said, he'd recovered an image. I don't know who it is. All right. So what about everybody else then? It's ridiculous. Yeah. I'm confident if there was a crime and the SOCOL recovered a fingerprint or DNA sample, I'm 99.9% confident if that DNA or fingerprints is on the database, that person will be identified. 100, absolutely 100%.
Going back to Hertfordshire, the course that you've just done, out of those super recognisers in Hertfordshire, how many of those are police officers and how many come from other roles.
Right, so that's a really good question. So I think 7 to 5, and some people come from all sorts of different roles. There was there was 2 detective inspectors on it. There was a sergeant, and the other officers were PCs. As far as the police staff goes, there was somebody who worked in the as a civilian investigator. Some people had worked in the civilian, the control room. But I mean, I went to one police force, and the catering manager was a super recognizer. So you never quite know, but. What happens now? What was good and what I did in the Met and what Hertfordshire can do is that if you've got a certain, and we don't just say they're a super recognizer. Professor Davis classifies them. So are they good at spotting faces in crowds? Are they good at matching images? Are they good? So when something happens, we've got a soccer match, we've got to go to police that, or we've got masses of CCTV, or we've got a load of images of burglars here. We want to match them up with prolific burglars. You know which super recognizer to use. So there's a subset within their set to make sure you get the best individual.
Does this super recognizers thing go beyond faces? So,
Yes.
for example, registration numbers of cars.
Well, we don't know about that because we know that you know and I know police officers who are good at that. What the science tells us and what the Greenwich University team have found is that the hypothalamus is a part of your brain where the recognition comes from. So it's hereditary, you're born with it. It also sort of contains the area of the brain which is to do with voices. So if you're a super face recognizer, you might be a super voice recognizer.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah. So there's a lot of talent. The thing is, there's a lot of talented people in the police whose talent is not being used. So when we did testing at the yard, the guy who came number 1, he was very good. He in the riots, the facial recognition system, obviously they improved. This is 2011, but even then, it recognised 1 individual out of 4,000. PC Gary Collins identified 180 suspects. But the person who came to, Alison Young, she had no idea she was a super recognizer. She thought everybody had that skill, and she worked in an area of policing, say, for example, child abuse, where there isn't that, it's a relative who's doing the crime or whatever. So there's no need to be identifying images. So she didn't know she had the skill. She thought everybody could do. So my message to supervisors is you've got people on your teams who've got real skills, and you could really utilise those skills to make communities safer and catch more criminals.
How many of the forces have taken this on at the moment?
Right, so we've got the Met. We started in the Met. Thames Valley Police, they use them particularly for spotting suspects against violence against women and girls. Essex Police did some testing, but they've not utilised their super recognisers properly. And Hertfordshire Police is the main one for me at the moment, and I'm impressed with them. And the City Police as well. I did some training for and picked out the super recognisers for the City of London Police. But yeah, it's like everything in policing, it takes time, doesn't it? Things are slow. But because, for example, I went in 2015 after being in the military police in Germany, I went to assist the German police, who they had a lot of sex attacks in Cologne in New Year's Eve, and I took 2 of my super recognisers, and strangely they must all be linked to something because they found the German super recognisers, but there are no, yeah, bizarre, isn't it? It's like the Tomorrow People or something. But there are now more super recogniser units in Germany than there are in England, and there's a whole different. That there's interforce rivalry in the UK, isn't there? Met. I remember even with my Bolton accent going up to help the Hillsborough inquiry, and it was like, what's this Cockney wide boy doing up here? This sort of carry on. And you see that in the Yorkshire Ripper inquiry where they've got to catch their own Ripper first and all this nonsense. Whereas I went to Germany, and the equivalent of the detective superintendent said to me, if you can help us, help us. And that was a real refreshing change, And so, but there are super recogniser units in Queensland, in Australia now, and we're just breaking out in the States. So, yeah, all over the world, really. So, but we started it, and I think we need to finish it, really, because there are so many human super recognisers who could make such a difference. So, as I say, not only making IDs and linking, but verifying facial recognition ones. But just by the way, I did technology as well. So I saw some advertising software which picks out brands when they're showing at sporting events. So I use the same software to find a guy in the same T-shirt 3 times. So, and then we got his face because of his mugshot, and the super recognisers got him for more crimes. But so there's nothing wrong with mixing technology with this new skill. And at a time, so this live facial, the retrospective facial recognition, I dealt with Big Brother watching. No one really has a problem with that. I've got an image of a burglar. I'm going to check if we've got his image. No one fussed about it. Where you sort of wind people up is the live facial recognition at a football match, at a shopping centre, and this is the one that stirs people up. And if we can show, if we are going to do that, the person checking the image has been tested and tried, has got real abilities to do this. Because I was speaking to different forces. So one force said, the 2 guys who received the images, they're technical, like computer boffins. The Met just gives it to anybody. They give them a briefing on identity, sit in their van. Why would you do that? The analogy I draw is a sniper rifle. In the army, if the army buys a sniper rifle, it doesn't give it to any soldier. It gives it to the soldier who's the best natural shot. That's how you do things. Because not everybody can do that. And so, and if we did this, we'd have far less of these false identifications. I see once again the Met have been called to court. Some black guy was stopped at London Bridge. The facial recognition ping, they got him. And of course, he's not a robber or whatever else. He's some youth worker who's entirely innocent. And I would suggest if they had somebody in the van who was a super recognizer, yes, people make mistakes, but why not put somebody in there who's far, far less likely to make a mistake?
Going back to the super recognizers that you're working with at the moment, then, say if I'm a super recognizer, I'm in Hertfordshire, but there's a Bobby in the Met who's circulated a suspect has been wanted. None of the super recognizers recognise this guy. Is there a way for the Hertfordshire cops to then? Is there some sort of central system that you run at the moment?
So I'm working on that. So again, with technology, and I offer this. I'm looking for somebody to do this for free. So we designed a database which would do that. At the moment, if you think of I base all my work on fingerprints and DNA. Every fingerprint, whether it's identified or unidentified, every DNA mark, whether it's identified or unidentified, is in one place. So if you put something on today and there's no match, well, it might be matched in 10 years' time. With images, we've got a sort of mugshot database over here. We've got different forces with different CCTV, that's all over there. We've got some surveillance pictures over here. It's a mess. Let's put them all in the one place. And this is what we've designed and what we're aiming to do. And what we do with, so what I'm hoping to do with Hearts is set up the system, get it going, where they regularly receive images and I make sure they see them. And what you'll find is the Met may well then share them, but it has to be better than a sort of bodge-up system. At the moment, it's a bodge system. We need it as a systematic approach. So all the images, as I say, nationally are in one place. And even it's the point where if you're arrested in custody, you have your fingerprints and DNA taken in a mugshot. The fingerprints and DNA is checked against a database. The mugshot's filed. It would be far better if the mugshot was checked against all the images that we have. Has this face? Has this pattern? Has it been found anywhere else? And then the super recognizer can say, "Yeah, I agree, that's a match. So let's deal with it." So there's so much to be done with images. The police could solve so much more crime if they were far more organised with images.
If people are interested in knowing more about this database that you're setting up, can you just give people the details for that?
Yes, so they could contact me on Mike, M-I-K-E, Neville, Neville, at superrecognisersinternational.com. That's all one phrase. So Mike.Neville at superrecognisersinternational.com. I'm working on, I'm helping a company really, but they want a force or law enforcement agency to pilot it for free. So it's a good offer, and it could make a big difference.
We've touched on it briefly about facial recognition and AI, and again, it's something that I've experienced as a cop for 8.5 years. Police forces, especially ICT departments, they tend to want to buy the all singing, all dancing technology rather than keeping it simple and walking before they can run, so to speak. which seems to be what's happening here with all of this AI facial
Well, I'll give you an
technology.
example, Paul, on that. So I found out the other week that it costs about £250,000. And then there's for the camera system that you stick on a vehicle or something like that, or a standalone facial recognition system. And then on top of that, there's an annual fee to pay for the license. Okay, it costs a tenth of that to have 30 super recognizers. So
Mm.
when I get told, oh, it's a budget issue, then well, if you're gonna, if me, I was a soldier at 16 and I was in the police till I was 50. I'm now a businessman, and I know it's far better to spend a tenth of the money to get more results. But police, they don't work like that. There is a real obsession with this facial recognition stuff. It's good, but as I say, the live stuff tends to wind people up. There's certain political classes who will cause a fuss about that, and every time there's a mistake, they leap upon it. And also, as I've said, the number of some forces have given me 25% are good enough for of the CCTV retrospective ones. Another force told me it's 2% are good enough. So it's somewhere in between that. But even if it's 25%, what about the other 75% of the images of people captured at the scene of a crime? What people expect is that, I fitted a CCTV camera to my house, or my car was underneath the camera, or my wife was walking down the street and the camera caught the moment that the person grabbed her. They expect something to be done about that. And it's not, when the police, so the public don't expect Sherlock Holmes. But they expect better than Inspector Clouseau. They expect something where something's done. And at the moment, too often, the images are lost, they're not used. And this winds the public up, because, of course, when they park the car in the wrong place, it always gets caught on CCTV, doesn't it? And you get your
Yeah.
£200 fine or something. But like I say, when you get robbed on CCTV, oh no, it wasn't working. Well, that's not good enough, is it? And it's a shame, really, because it does offer these great opportunities. I'm passionate about this. I've been banging on about it since 1995 was my first arrest for CCTV. I've been banging on about a system since about 2006. And so so much more could be done in a very simple way. But as you've alluded to, too many senior officers, they think if they buy the latest kit, but they buy the latest kit and they don't put the people and processes in place to make sure it produces results.
Absolutely. So next question then. We've covered briefly the what humans can do in terms of recognition versus algorithms or AI. We've talked about grainier images. Super recognizers are more likely to pick up on who that is. We've talked about cost as well. But is there any other advantages of having humans do this rather than the computers?
Well, I just think ethically is a big thing, that people do accept that a human has been involved. And as I say, the Surveillance Camera Commissioner said that everything, if an AI does pick up somebody, there can't be an arrest until there's been human intervention. So they play that part. And also, the big thing I found is if you recognise officers' talents and use them, they feel really good about themselves. I used to have award ceremonies. Because who picked out the most people, who had most detections through it.
That's a really good idea.
And it boosts people up. And also what I used
Yeah.
to do as well, there's a constant friction between the police and the CCTV control room, or the bus CCTV, because, the police go in there, we must have it and we must have it now. And then two weeks later, they're still not collected it, So, or a good officer will get it, or a lazy officer won't. So I'd have an award ceremony, and they get an award. So the people who gave us the images, the officers who made the images and volunteers, and then the super recognizers who made the IDs, and the detectives who convert them into detections. Just by recognizing your people, it gives them the boost. Officers all the time, they're running around they've been running around like madmen and women, aren't they, all the time, not getting much thanks. So to have that moment where your family come in, have a certificate, some clown like me is a compere, and some nice senior person dishes them an award, and they have a glass of wine and a vol au vent, that person's not going to be sick less, aren't they? They're going to be sick less, they're going to work harder. It's a win-win, but we often forget these little things, And like I say, you can't be trained to be super recognizers, but you're born with it. So you're talking 1 or 2% of people are super recognizers. So there's thousands of super recognizers in the police service who could be used in a much smarter way.
What about civilians? So you've talked briefly there about there's a test online that people can take to see if they're a super recognizer. If they are, then they can contact you and you'll do something with it. And what we'll
Yeah,
do, we'll add the link to that web page,
thank you.
to the description of the podcast and everything, so everyone's got access. So if I'm a civilian, I go online, I do the test. What happens next if I come back as potentially being a super recognizer?
So I run courses for civilians as well. So some organisations employ super recognisers. One called Yoti. You might have seen if you online safety stuff. They do the check, or you've applied for a mortgage recently. So they're a UK and Indian company who employ super recognisers to verify ID. There's a company called FaceWatch. You might have seen they do they have facial recognition in things like the Co-op, and no one's alerted until a super recogniser is verified that it's that. There's another company, Trust ID. There's all sorts of these ID verification companies that employ super recognisers. And then, of course, some people I train to be super recognisers work in security, in casinos. The courses I run online, I get people from all over the world on them. If you're a CCTV operator, as I say, engaged in security or whatever, this is where being a super recogniser can make a real big difference.
Looking ahead, what are your goals for expanding the use and recognition of super recognizers worldwide?
Well, I look at it as a whole. I think super recognizers is the sexy bit of the image issue. It's the sexy bit. I've been approached by an American company about making a TV show about this. The idea that people have superpowers is a good thing, yeah. But
Yeah.
my vision is that images will be treated the same as fingerprints and DNA. So we can measure how many images of suspects, police forces gathering, how many of those are being identified and by what means. Was it by a super recognizer? Was it by a chiz? Was it by facial recognition? Was it by a media appeal or whatever? And then we also looking at how do we link images together by super recognizers, by facial recognition, by pattern recognition, all that sort of stuff. And then how many of those become detected crimes, and the Home Office ultimately measuring them. And as I say, it's linked into when you're arrested, your face is scanned and your clothing, and we can check that out. And so it becomes a holistic approach. So, I've got everybody these days carries their own video recorder, don't they? Their own mobile phone.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
40% of households have Ring doorbells or home CCTV. So my vision really is that Britain, I'm a crime historian as well. So I know the first fingerprint case, I know about the first DNA case, I know about all sorts of famous crimes. And I want us to be the leaders in using images to catch criminals and being part of setting up that systematic approach. And I offer my services to anybody who I can help. If I can give anybody advice, I don't cost a fortune. As long as I can feed my several children and ex-wives, then I'm perfectly okay. I don't need loads of money.
Were the super recognizers that you've worked with ever able to switch off outside of work because of this talent that they've got?
No, often not. Which brought them their own woes. What you find, when you speak to somebody who's a super recognizer, one of the things they'll say is that they have to hold it down because they'll start recognizing people they're at primary school with or who they saw in the cinema 5 years ago, and then start this, oh, I know you, and people think they're a stalker. So one of the and the other thing you find, and this is for your listeners and viewers, that one key point, are you the person who watches a TV I was watching Colditz, which was from 1974, and I thought, I know the SS officer, I know him, and I searched Lord Melbury from Fawlty Towers. So, what they'll do is in a film, they'll be annoying their other half by saying, oh, that bloke, he was in the Coronation Street, or he was in Jaws. So that's a key sign. So if you have those signs, you may be one of them.
Yeah, because I can just imagine if you are a super recognizer, you just walk in through a busy shopping centre with your family, just constantly scanning faces.
Literally. And I was with a guy called Jamie Smith yesterday. He was the first one we identified in the Met. And we're out. We did an exercise in a shopping centre, and he couldn't stop. He's all over the place, And he said another time when you have to ring the wife up and say, I'll be late home, because he spotted somebody on the way home. I mean, one guy, Gary Collins, we gave him an iPad, and he actually identified a murderer over his Sunday roast. He can't stop.
What?
but it's a God-given talent. So and we might as well use these things to make our communities safer. That's what the men and women who join the police or and in the police staff do, isn't it? So if you can use that extra talent, it really is good. But it's just dependent on senior officers. Sometimes got to bite the bullet and say, a friend of mine who was a brigadier, he said to a chief constable, he's gone now, but I think it's Dorset, and he said, "Oh, you're going to have these super recognisers down here. We don't copy anything the Met does." And he said, "I can't
Ugh.
believe that." He said, "That's the most stupid thing I've ever heard." But you know, and
Yeah.
I know that's what happens in British policing in particular. Somehow people have got to get over that and say, "Do you know what? That's a good idea that these are a lot of thought of. How do we make it work in our force area for the good of the communities that we serve?" Because it really will make a difference. And of course, because it's not just like CCTV, it's live. You've got a major event. And I'll give you another example that I dealt with major incidents, like for example the fox hunting riot disturbance, whichever side you're on at Parliament. And there was all this video, and the commander said every division in the Metropolitan Police has got to give me somebody. So they'll give you anybody really. And I had a sergeant who had sleep apnea and was colourblind. Now I'm sure he's good at something, but it is not viewing CCTV. So if it was fingerprints or DNA, you get the best people. Images, you get people who are possibly not the best.
Yeah.
But then it came to a terrible murder, Alice Gross, a young girl. She followed over a bridge in West London by a man from Eastern Europe who was a known murderer. But the super recognisers were used to track them, follow him, see where he'd gone, and they set aside 12 weeks of viewing. They did it in 2 weeks. Now, sometimes it's how long is a piece of string, but their ability to spot him, find him where he'd gone, really helped and resulted in a search being made and her body being found. So it's just about professionalising CCTV viewing, making sure if you've got a football ground where there's a particular troublesome area, you've got 5 officers. You know who's the super recogniser, you put them in the right place. It's just about the police are good at. We've used 20 pencils. We've overused too much overtime. So they're good at too much petrol's being burnt off or whatever. But then they waste the talents of their officers, and you waste a talent if you don't use it. And I say 1 or 2% or more probably, because people are drawn into jobs that if you're good at something, you're drawn into a particular role, aren't you? So there'll be more super recognised in policing and security than in, say, I don't know, banking. But 1, 2, 3% of the police force may well have this talent. So why not utilise them? Every force has got 50, 60, so get them used.
So the super recognisers can utilise their skills just by recognising people that they've perhaps dealt with before, but also by being sent out as almost like a spotter.
Yeah. So you don't have to know them. So I mean, one of the most incredible people I saw was a civilian, a lady, and we were dealing with incidents at the Royal Windsor Horse Show where a group of activists, there was about 100 names of people who were trying to get in and put out this banner because the Queen was there and the King of Bahrain. This lady had memorised the list, and she'd never seen these people in her life, but she'd sit there and say, right, number 77, 59. Not just, that sort of skill. And
how long did it usually take them in order to remember these faces and names?
Seconds. So again,
Really?
I was with Professor Davis this week. He's got a great video clip he did with a guy called James Rabbit. Was a Met DC. He's a DS in Cambridgeshire. He was one of the best ever super recognisers I worked with, and the BBC filmed him at Waterloo. He was shown fleetingly 4 girls' faces. And then an hour later, the BBC, fed him into Waterloo Station on a Friday afternoon, and he picked out all 4. And he literally looked at, 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, even the criminals were impressed. I said about Idris earlier, the jailer at Charing Cross. He identified a guy for 2 rubbish. They're really rubbish, awful images. The guy pleaded guilty, but he had the decency to write to Idris from prison saying, well done, I never thought you'd get me for those. So even the villainy respects it.
Have there ever been cases when people have been incorrectly identified?
Yeah, of course. It's like everything. People have been incorrectly identified for fingerprints and DNA, but very, very few. Very, very few. And there's a system. So what would happen is we wouldn't just arrest somebody off a super recognizer either. So the super recognizer would submit saying, my image is circulated, and then so, right, I think that's Mike Neville. So in the office, the researchers would get my mugshot. Is it this person? If it was a very serious crime, we'd actually have a peer review, another super recognizer. But everybody was checked. Does he live in the area? Has he got previous convictions for a similar sort of crime? Have we got images on social media or on our mugshots where he's wearing the same clothes? So there's a whole
Yeah.
series of checks and balances, and then a supervisor would sign off that yes, I agree. There's reasonable grounds to arrest this person as being the person in the image, and then that will be sent to the DCI in charge of that area. So,
Right. Okay.
what you try, it's like with fingerprints, you do everything you can to sort of make sure there isn't a mistake.
Have you got any particularly memorable or funny stories from working with super recognizers?
Yeah, I've got lots actually, but
I know
just,
you talked about somebody recognizing somebody over Sunday lunch or whatever, but have you got
yeah, well, I
some
mean,
quite
one
funny
super
ones?
recognizer, he identified somebody by a fleeting glance. He rode by him, and they arrested the criminal, and he said, "That's unfair. It's unfair. It's unfair." But I think what sums up, well, it's unfair that the police use super recognizer. What sums up, my latest one, I dealt with a guy. So a record hit, like for what we call face matching, was 43. A guy called Austin Caballero, the gentleman thief, and I often do TV and stuff, and for daytime TV, I do some crime stuff. And Austin Caballero's perfect because it's a female audience in general for daytime TV. He's a good-looking guy. He's stealing things that my wife would be interested in: your high-value clothes, perfumes, and all sorts of stuff. And there's no violence involved. Well, so I did all this, and about 6 months ago, I got a message on my website saying, "Mr. Neville, this is Austin Caballero. I'm sick of being on TV. You're ruining my business. I need to meet and have a drink with you." So I actually met him, and we had a pint together, and it was a bit. I got him 3.5 years for his skullduggery. But it was a bit like after a rugby match, I played in the Met Police rugby team, and when you're on the rugby field, you're fighting away, and when the rugby match is finished, it's just sort of shaking hands, isn't it? So it was in that style. But what struck me, having speaking to him, is that we got him for 43. Yeah, he'd done over 500. The police had never recovered the images in the other, 460 or whatever.
Right.
So that was good. And then nice stories, really. I suppose not funny but nice. We had the tragedy of the Hillsborough inquiry. I mean, that went on for so long. I was in training when I was at Hendon when Hillsborough happened, and some of the super recognisers I sent to it weren't even born when it happened. But I sent 4 super recognisers who they hadn't found 16 of the victims in the crowd footage or entering the ground. They did find them, and one of the images they found was one of the victims walking to the ground with a big smile on his face, and that image was given to his mother, which I thought was a nice touch, really. But yeah, lots of crimes. The Novichok case was possibly the most famous one. And one of the guys on that was, I would suggest, almost autistic, but that disability became a super ability. When you've got to watch a month's worth of footage of people entering this country, then you've got to watch a week of footage from the town centre and say, has anybody in set A and set B? That is a super ability, really. So, yeah. But it's good to be involved in innovation, isn't it? New things. So, as I say, I'm proud that Britain has led the way in so much development of law enforcement. And this is just another one of those new ways that we can take to the world.
We've touched on this very briefly, but how a super recognizer is used beyond policing. I know you've talked about security and stuff, but what are some of the things that the listeners or viewers might not consider? So, what other things can they get involved in?
Well, we do some weird and wacky investigations sometimes. So, we had an Indian guy, for example. He was told that his wife-to-be had appeared in an Asian Babes porn movie 10 years before. So one of the super recognisers had to check the said video, and we could happily assure him that that wasn't his wife to be. So yeah, we get some crazy private investigation work. One guy was convinced that a nun had been replaced by a doppelganger at the Vatican and all this sort of stuff. So we do this. So
Oh, he's one for you then.
Oh, sorry,
He's one for you.
I've just been passed a message. But we got a Californian professor. Where else but California? Yeah? And I don't know if you're old enough to know this, Paul, but there was a rumor. There was a rumor that Paul McCartney had been killed in a traffic accident, and he was replaced by a man called Billy Spears. Yeah. And there's all these clues on Beatles records, like Sergeant Pepper, that says Billy Spears. And if you look at the Abbey Road cover, there's all sorts of clues that Paul is dead, apparently. And so we had to compare, Paul McCartney in 64 and Paul McCartney in 68. And look, we could happily say that he is the same man. But so we get some weird and wacky historical stuff.
I don't really want to talk about politics, but like there's often rumours about Putin. Putin using different people and
we did this yesterday.
How true is that?
Well, because when I do my work, like with the Hertfordshire Police, you have filler exercises, so we do different things, crime. And somebody brought up Putin, so I brought up the list, and there was a big debate. There's a whole series of faces, and there was a big debate: are there 2 or 3 people there? So, there's all these different. I know one of the other ones I use is like Alcatraz. Remember, 3 guys escaped from Alcatraz, and there's supposed to be an image of them in the 70s. These are good exercises for super econisers to use these historical cases where there's an image and you're trying to say, is it that person? It doesn't really matter if you're right or wrong, does it really? But it can be. Also, it's good for politicians. Can you imagine being a politician super econiser? I say, oh yes, Paul Cooper. Yes, we did meet a year ago, didn't we? You feel all good straight away. I must vote for this man. He's picked me out. If you're involved in, let's say, in sort of VIP sort of work, or not necessarily people are very important, very famous, but you're shown a list of people that this man's got £1 billion to invest in, and you straight away. So the skill itself can be used in different ways outside of policing and security.
Have you got one more story for us, like private investigation? I love that first one. I want another one.
So I'm trying to think of. There's a lot of Indian people send me some crazy stuff, but the nun one, the one at the Vatican. Apparently, the one at the Vatican. This nun was told 3 things by the Virgin Mary, and there's a conspiracy theory that they're holding out on the 3rd one. And so this guy said he wanted me to compare all these images and say that she'd been killed off. So we did a comparison. Never tell people until they pay the money. And when he paid the money, I said, it's all the same person. So he got really angry. So on the internet now, I'm part of the Vatican's conspiracy. So there's always something with some wacky stuff, usually from America or California in particular. Yeah.
I mean, you've told me there about private investigations where you've disproven a theory. Is there anything where you've proven something has actually happened? Yeah, well, one point I would make, Paul, is that with super econizer, it's not just the ability to be that is definitely the same person. It's the ability to say that is not the same person. This is just as important. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So if you remember the case of Khashoggi, who was the dissident Saudi journalist, he was tricked into the Saudi embassy in Istanbul. They killed him. They then got a sort of a man who looked like him and put him in his clothes, and he went off around Istanbul, and the Saudis could say, well, we have killed him, he's on CCTV over there. And it was one of my super econisers who watched the CCTV and said, that is definitely not Khashoggi, definitely not him. And also, this is how Grenfell was done. So the terrible events at Grenfell Tower. So the super econiser there had 2 roles. The first one was about the deceased. So you had the tragedy of people going up to a flat, being told to stay there, being in fear of being burnt to death and jumping out and dying. So they were shown the faces, and their job for the coroner was to trace when they entered the block and to wherever. But the other thing you had 17 people who tried to defraud the charity by saying, my family lived there and they've all been burnt to death. So what happened there is that the super econiser watched a month of the concierge footage and could say none of those people ever entered this block. So that's the sort of negative. So the negative sometimes is just as important as the positive. Okay, and just for a bit of fun then, Any policing stories? Any memorable or funny policing stories you can remember off the top of your head? Something that you might tell people quite regularly.
I think I've told. I think I've told you all my the funniest just whipping through my head as to who I've identified or who has been identified. No, I think I've told you the most of the amusing stories.
Another random question: have you ever used your warrant card off duty before?
Me,
Yeah.
off duty, what, to arrest people who've been spotted. I mean, I know that if you talk about using the warrant card to make an off-duty arrest, a lot of super recognisers make lots of off-duty arrests because they're spotting people all the time, and I did that, so especially when I was dealing with all the robbers and the like.
What is the one thing you wish the public or policymakers fully understood about this natural human ability?
I wish they understood that it should be measured properly and that Home Office would measure it. If that was done, then the police would be forced to use it. It's a tragedy that this skill exists. It could make people safer, and through politics and childishness or whatever else, that it's not being utilised fully, and we're not using the natural skills that people have been born with.
We touched earlier on people that can go online and do the test to see if they're a super recogniser. Remind us of the website again.
So if they go to the Greenwich University website and search Super Recogniser Test, or simply Google Greenwich Super Recogniser Test, and you'll see it there. You can also look at my website. It's on my website as well, superrecognisersinternational.com. It says take the test, and it's a free test. It's there. So superrecognisersinternational.com.
That's great. Well, thanks for coming on the podcast, Mike. And
it's a pleasure.
You get yourself one of these Pocket Sergeant podcast mug.
Thank you.
So you'll have to fire me across an address.
I will do.
It's just a little token to say thank you very much for coming on it. Really, really fascinating stuff.
Thank you.
And I'm looking forward to seeing what reaction we get from this.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks very much for coming on, and we'll speak to you soon.
Cheers, Paul. All the best.